Number 1. The Chinese Magic Mirror. Picture a mirror of solid bronze. One side is polished until it shines like silver. The other side is cast with a raised design, a dragon, some flowers, a few characters. It is a heavy, ordinary-looking disc. And yet, when you tilt its bright face into direct sunlight and throw the reflection onto a wall, something impossible happens. The hidden design on the back appears in the patch of light. The pattern that is cast into the far side of the metal shows up in the reflection off the near side. It is as if the sunlight has passed straight through solid bronze. The Chinese called these objects Tu Guangjing, which means light-penetrating mirror. In the West, we call them magic mirrors. They date back to the Han Dynasty, more than 2,000 years ago. And for most of that time, nobody could explain them. The great Song Dynasty scholar Shen Kuo wrote about them around the year 1088 in his famous Dream Pool essays. He described the effect in detail, admitted he owned several, and confessed that he could not understand how they worked. 1,000 years would pass before anyone could. The answer came in 1932 from the British physicist William Bragg. The secret is not transparency at all. It is the surface. When a craftsman polishes the thin bronze face, the metal flexes ever so slightly over the thicker and thinner regions behind it. Where the relief on the back is raised, the front is a fraction more rigid. Where the metal is thin, it bends a little more under the polishing. The result is a face covered in undulations, far too small for the eye to see. Differences measured in millionths of a meter. Flat to your gaze, but not flat to a beam of light. When sunlight reflects off those invisible ripples, it reproduces the hidden pattern on the wall. The metal itself was a high tin bronze, roughly 20 to 30% tin, which takes a brilliant, silvery polish. Not every mirror does this. Most surviving Han mirrors are simply mirrors. The transparent effect required a very particular combination of casting and polishing, and genuine examples are rare. The historian Joseph Needham, in his Monumental Science and Civilization in China, called them one of the subtlest achievements of Chinese metalworking. Modern metallurgists have reproduced the trick, confirming Bragg's explanation by carefully scraping and polishing thin bronze until the ghost image appears. Today, the mirrors are a standard teaching example in surface science, a lesson in the gap between what the eye sees and what reflected light quietly reveals. Centuries later, Japanese artisans took the idea and made it sacred and secret. During the Edo persecution of Christians, some craftsmen cast mirrors that projected a hidden cross or an image of Christ, invisible on the mirror itself. Hidden Christians used them in secret. As recently as 2019, the Kyoto National Museum discovered that one of its old Buddhist mirrors projects a concealed image of the Amida Buddha. Here is the essential lesson of this entire video, present in the very first object. The people who made these mirrors could produce the effect long before anyone could explain it. Skill ran centuries ahead of theory. If bronze could be made to fake transparency, imagine what a culture might do with a material that was already clear. Number 2. The rock crystal eyes of Saqqara. Walk into a gallery of Old Kingdom Egyptian sculpture, and one thing will stop you cold. The eyes. On the finest statues, the eyes are alive. They are wet. They follow you. You feel watched. This is not an accident of preservation. It is engineering, more than 4,500 years old. The Egyptians built these eyes as a composite. A rim of copper formed the outline, like an eyeliner. Behind it sat a white of magnesite or quartz, and set into that was a cornea of rock crystal, clear natural quartz, ground into a gentle curve. At the back of the crystal, the sculptor drilled a tiny conical pit and blackened it. That pit becomes the pupil. Because it is a cone filled with shadow, it scatters light exactly the way a living pupil does, and the eye seems to shift and track as you move. The two masterpieces are famous. One is the wooden statue of Ka-Aper from Saqqara, around 2500 BCE. When Auguste Mariette's workmen uncovered it, they were so struck by its lifelike face that they named it Sheikh el Beled, the village headman, because it looked like their own local chief. The other is the seated scribe, now in the Louvre, also from Saqqara. Its crystal eyes are among the most arresting in all of art history. In modern times, a vision scientist named J. Enoch at Berkeley studied these eyes for years. He measured the curvature of the crystal and concluded that the ancient makers had produced near-perfect optical models of the human eye. They understood, in practice, how a real cornea catches light and where its highlight sits. Rock crystal is hard, a 7 on the Mohs scale, and shaping it into a smooth curved cornea meant grinding it patiently with quartz sand and emery. This was not casual work. It was the summit of a lapidary tradition built over centuries of drilling beads and hollowing stone vessels. To the Egyptians, the purpose went beyond beauty. Lifelike eyes let the Ka, the spirit of the person, look out from the statue and receive offerings. The ritual called the opening of the mouth was performed to animate a statue, to let it breathe and see. So these eyes see on 2 levels at once. The statue appears to see you, and it was built so that the soul inside could see out. Most Egyptologists stop there, calling this superb inlay work rather than true optics. A few, like Enoch, wondered aloud whether the skill was closer to real lens making than we admit, which raises the obvious question. Could an ancient craftsman actually grind a working lens? Number 3. The Visby Lenses. The answer was buried in the ground on a Baltic island, and it was placed there by Vikings. On Gotland, in Sweden, near the town of Visby, archaeologists have recovered a set of lenses ground from rock crystal. They come from graves and silver hoards dated to the 10th and 11th centuries, and they are not crude. In the 1990s, a team of optical physicists, among them Olaf Schmidt and Bernd Lingelbach, examined the best of them and found something that should not exist. The finest Visby lenses are aspheric. That means their curve is not a simple arc of a sphere. It is a more sophisticated shape, the very shape that minimizes the blurring, called spherical aberration. In Europe, that shape was not deliberately described until the 17th century by Descartes. Yet here it was, ground into quartz, 600 years too early. These lenses are only a few centimeters across, and they magnify by roughly 3 to 5 times. They also revive an older puzzle. An Assyrian disc of rock crystal, the Nimrud lens, ground more than 2,700 years ago, hints that the craft of shaping crystal to bend light reaches back much further still. Many were mounted in bands of silver. You could call them jewelry, except that their optical quality is far better than any ornament needs to be. Almost certainly, they were not made on Gotland. The island was one of the great trading hubs of the Viking world, its hoards stuffed with Arabic silver coins and goods from Byzantium. The lenses likely came up the great river routes from the Eastern Roman world, or the Islamic Near East, and the timing is striking. At exactly this moment, the scholar Ibn al-Haytham, known in the West as Al-Hazan, was writing his book of optics, the work that founded the real science of lenses and vision. These crystal lenses predate the invention of eyeglasses in Italy by about 250 years. Why crystal and not glass? Because Viking age glass was full of bubbles and impurities, while natural quartz is beautifully clear. What were they for? Nobody wrote it down, so we can only infer. Some were probably magnifiers or reading aids. Some may have been burning glasses, used to focus sunlight and start fires. A more cautious view says the aspheric shape might be a lucky byproduct of hand polishing rather than deliberate design. But whatever the intent, the Visby lenses shatter the neat story that good optics began in Renaissance Italy. They sit today in the Gotland Museum, small windows that could bring the distant and the tiny into focus. And that raises a new possibility. What if an object were made not to see things far away, but to see upward, to read the sky itself? Number 4. The Nebra Sky Disc. In 1999, 2 men with a metal detector dug up a bronze disc on a hilltop near Nebra in Germany. What they found is now considered the oldest concrete image of the cosmos ever discovered. The disc is about 30 centimeters across and weighs around 2 kilograms. Its blue-green surface is inlaid with gold, a full sun or moon, a crescent, and 32 golden stars. Among those stars is a tight little cluster, the Pleiades. The looters sold it on the black market, and it was finally recovered in 2002 in a police sting in Basel, led by the archaeologist Harold Meller. The disc was buried with a hoard of bronze swords and axes that dates it to around 1600 BCE, the early Bronze Age. And chemistry has traced its very materials across a continent. The gold came from Cornwall in Britain. The copper came from the Alps in Austria. A single object knitting together trade routes that spanned Bronze Age Europe. It is not just a pretty picture, it is an instrument. Along the rim, 2 gold arcs were later added, each spanning about 82 degrees. That is precisely the angle at the latitude of Nebra, between where the sun sets at midsummer and where it sets at midwinter. The disk encodes the swing of the sun across the year. The Pleiades cluster marked the farming calendar, its appearance and disappearance signaling when to sow and when to reap. Scholars argue that the disk even held a rule for keeping the lunar and solar calendars in step, using the thin crescent moon and the star cluster together. And the hill where it was buried aligns with a distant peak, the Brocken, where the sun goes down on the summer solstice. In 2020, 2 researchers tried to argue the disk was much younger, from the Iron Age. The response was swift and firm. Meller and his colleagues showed that soil chemistry trapped in the disk's corrosion matched the exact spot on the hillside where it was found. The Bronze Age date held. What makes the object so haunting is that the people who made it had no writing at all. They could not record a single word, yet they could read the heavens with enough precision to carve a working calendar in bronze and gold. This was seeing the unseen in the deepest sense, reading time and season out of the night sky. But not every mirror was made to read the stars. Some were made to summon spirits. Number 5. John Dee's Aztec Obsidian Mirror. In the British Museum, there is a disc of black volcanic glass, obsidian, polished to a dark shine, about 18.5 centimeters across. For a long time, its label read simply, Dr. Dee's Mirror. Its story crosses an ocean and 2 utterly different worlds of magic. The mirror was made by the Aztecs, the Mexica of central Mexico, before the Spanish conquest. To them, obsidian was sacred to the god Tezcatlipoca, whose name means smoking mirror. He was the deity of night, sorcery, and prophecy, and he was said to watch all the deeds of humankind in a mirror of black obsidian. Aztec priests used such mirrors to scry, to gaze into the dark surface and see visions, and to divine the future. After the conquest, objects like this flowed back to Europe as exotic curiosities. There the mirror acquired a second life. It became attached to John Dee, born in 1527, the brilliant and strange advisor to Queen Elizabeth I. Dee was a mathematician, an astrologer, and a magus. He assembled one of the largest libraries in England. He advised on navigation and calendars, and he even coined the phrase British Empire. And in the 1580s, working with a medium named Edward Kelly, Dee spent years gazing into showstones, crystals, and mirrors, trying to speak with the angels. Out of these sessions came an entire supposed angelic language, which they called Enochian. Through the black glass, Dee and Kelly believed they glimpsed distant events and hidden knowledge, dictated to them letter by letter. Did Dee actually own this particular mirror? The honest answer is that the link is traditional rather than proven. The trail runs through the 18th century collector Horace Walpole, who labeled it as D's, but the object's origin is no longer in doubt. In 2021, a team led by Stuart Campbell at Manchester used a technique called X-ray fluorescence to fingerprint the obsidian's chemistry. It matched the source at Pachuca, in Mexico. The mirror is unquestionably Aztec, made for Mexica ritual, later swept up into the angel magic of Renaissance England. Two traditions of seeing the unseen colliding in a single black disc. Some rulers, though, needed no spirits at all. One needed only a green stone. Number 6. Nero's Emerald. The Roman writer Pliny the Elder, who died in the eruption of Vesuvius in 79 CE, left us a single tantalizing sentence. In his Natural History, in the book on gemstones, he records that the Emperor Nero watched the combats of gladiators in a smaragdus, an emerald. That one line has been argued over for centuries, because everything depends on what he meant. The first reading is the boldest. Nero was nearsighted. A curved green gem, held to the eye, could have acted as a corrective lens, sharpening the distant figures on the arena sand. If that is right, this is one of the earliest hints in all of history of a lens used to help someone see. The second reading is more modest. The polished emerald was a dark mirror, and Nero watched the reflection of the games in it, cutting the harsh Mediterranean glare, like a pair of tinted glasses. The third reading is medical. The ancients widely believed that the color green rested and refreshed tired eyes. Pliny himself says that gem cutters relieved their eye strain by gazing at emeralds. So Nero may simply have used it to soothe his eyes against the sun. We cannot even be sure of the material. In antiquity, the word smaragdus covered true emerald, but also green glass, peridot, and other green stones. Real emeralds in Nero's day came mostly from the Egyptian desert mines, the so-called Emerald Mountains. A large, clear one was a treasure. What we do know is that the Romans understood something of magnification. Nero's own tutor, the philosopher Seneca, noted that letters seen through a glass globe filled with water appear enlarged, and Romans used glass and crystal spheres as burning glasses to focus the sun and cauterize wounds. So the pieces of optics were lying around in the Roman world, scattered and unassembled. A magnifying globe here, a tinted stone there, a burning lens elsewhere. Nero and his emerald sit right on that boundary. A vain and theatrical emperor, using a special object to see what his flawed eyes could not. The gem itself is long lost. Only Pliny's sentence survives, forever ambiguous. Most historians favor the tinted mirror reading, but the story endures because it captures the human urge to reach for an object that improves on the eye. Other cultures reached for objects too, not to sharpen sight, but to read the will of a god. Number 7. The Urim and Thummim. In the Hebrew Bible, the high priest of Israel wore a jeweled breastpiece over his chest, set with 12 gemstones for the 12 tribes. And tucked within that breastpiece were two mysterious objects, the Urim and the Thummim. The names are usually translated as lights and perfections. They were instruments for asking God a direct question and receiving an answer. They appear across the earliest books in Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Their job was to deliver divine judgments, usually a yes or a no, on matters of state. Should the army go to war? Who is guilty? Which path should the nation take? And here is the enduring mystery. The Bible never once explains how they worked. We are told they exist and told they are used, but never shown the mechanism. Scholars have offered theories for 3,000 years. The most common is that they were a pair of sacred lots. Two stones, perhaps one for yes and one for no, drawn or cast to reveal the answer. There is textual support. In one passage in the book of Samuel, King Saul uses the Urim and Thummim to cast lots between himself and his son Jonathan, narrowing down who has broken an oath. Later tradition grew more miraculous. The historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century, claimed the gemstones of the breastplate physically shone with light to signal God's favor, and that this power had faded about 200 years before his own time. Rabbinic tradition offered an even more dramatic idea, that the engraved letters of the tribal names lit up, one by one, to spell out the answer. What happened to them? They simply vanish. After the destruction of the First Temple in 586 BCE, they fall silent. By the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, certain disputes are set aside to wait for a priest who could consult the Urim and Thummim, and that priest never comes. No artifact has ever been found. We do not know what they were made of, what they looked like, or how they were read. They are a pure textual ghost, an instrument for seeing the hidden will of heaven that left absolutely nothing behind. Another culture, far to the west, claimed to read the future not in glowing stones, but in raw flesh. Number 8. The bronze liver of Piacenza. In 1877, a farmer near Piacenza, in northern Italy, turned up a strange bronze object about 12.5 centimeters long. It was a model of a sheep's liver. Its surface was divided by fine engraved lines into more than 40 regions, and each region was labeled with the name of a god, written in the Etruscan alphabet. This is the bronze liver of Piacenza, and it is one of the most important religious objects ever recovered from the ancient Mediterranean. It was a working tool for a specialist called the haruspex, an Etruscan diviner who read the future in the liver of a sacrificed animal. The practice is called haruspicy, or hepatoscopy. When a sheep was slaughtered, the diviner would examine its liver, noting marks, colors, and any abnormality. Diviners paid special attention to one particular lobe, the processus pyramidalis, whose presence or absence could tilt an entire reading. Then he would match what he saw against this bronze map, region by region. A blemish in the zone of one god meant one thing. A feature in the zone of another meant something else. The liver was treated as a small mirror of the whole cosmos. Look at the rim of the bronze liver, and you find 16 sections. That number matters. The Etruscans divided the sky into 16 parts, and Roman writers describe exactly this scheme when they explain how the Etruscans read the direction of lightning. So the liver connects the body of a sheep to the vault of the heavens. Read the organ, and you read the sky. The gods named on it, Tinia, the chief sky god, Uni, Sel, and many others, let modern scholars like Massimo Pallottino reconstruct the Etruscan pantheon, and even parts of the Etruscan language, which is otherwise poorly understood. This way of seeing did not begin with the Etruscans. More than 1,000 years earlier, the Babylonians were doing the same thing, and clay models of livers survived from Mesopotamia, inscribed with omens. The Roman state adopted the Etruscan diviners wholesale. For centuries, the Senate and Roman generals consulted haruspices before battles and after strange prodigies. To read the future, they cut open an animal and studied the most blood-rich organ inside it. And on the far side of the world, in China, that very same impulse gave birth to something extraordinary, an entire system of writing. Number 9. Chinese oracle bones. More than 3,000 years ago, the kings of the Shang dynasty in China wanted to know the future, so they turned to fire and bone. They took the flat shoulder blades of oxen and the undershells of turtles, carved small hollows into the back, and pressed a hot poker into them. The heat cracked the bone with a sharp popping sound, and the shape of the crack was read as an answer from the ancestors, and the high god die. Then, beside the crack, they carved the question. And those carved questions are the oldest known Chinese writing, the direct ancestor of the characters used by more than 1 billion people today. The range of questions is astonishing in its humanity. Will the harvest be good? Will it rain? Will the king's toothache heal? Will the queen's childbirth go well? Should we make war? Many inscriptions record the king himself reading the cracks and pronouncing the outcome, and some even note afterward what actually came to pass. A preface, a question, a prediction, and sometimes a verification, all inscribed on a single piece of bone. The way these bones were rediscovered is almost unbearable. For centuries, Chinese farmers had been digging up old inscribed bones and selling them to apothecaries as dragon bones, to be ground into powder and swallowed as medicine. An incalculable archive of the ancient world was literally consumed. Then, in 1899, a scholar named Wang Yirong, who was ill with malaria, noticed ancient characters on the dragon bones in his medicine and recognized them for what they were. The hunt was on. From 1928, excavations at Yinshu, near Anyang, uncovered the royal archives, and today more than 150,000 pieces are known. Their importance is hard to overstate. The inscriptions name the kings of the Shang in order, and they matched the ancient history so well that they proved the Shang dynasty had truly existed, something scholars had begun to doubt. The script already contains several thousand characters and shows the same principles of construction used in Chinese writing ever since. Working from these inscriptions, the scholar Dong Zuobin later reconstructed a chronology of the Shang kings and their diviners. After the Shang fell, Chinese divination moved on from fire and bone toward the milfoil stalks and the hexagrams of the I Ching. In other words, the Chinese writing system was born in the act of trying to see the future. And yet, for all these genuine, world-changing objects, the single most famous seeing artifacts of all turned out to be something else entirely. Fakes. Number 10. The crystal skulls. They are unforgettable. Life-size human skulls, carved from solid clear quartz, glowing with an inner light. For decades they were sold to the world as ancient Aztec or Maya relics with psychic powers. The most famous is the Mitchell-Hedges skull, said to have been discovered by a young woman named Anna Mitchell-Hedges around 1924 at the Maya ruins of Lubantun in Belize during her adoptive father's expedition. It even has a separate, detachable lower jaw, and a polish so fine that promoters insisted it could never have been carved without modern machines. Around these objects grew a glittering mythology. There were said to be 13 crystal skulls scattered across the earth, and when they were finally reunited, they would reveal knowledge to save humanity. Hollywood embraced the legend, most famously in the 2008 film Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. People claimed to see visions inside the quartz, images of the future, healing energies. Then science looked closely, and the story fell apart. Researchers at the British Museum and the Smithsonian, including Margaret Sachs and the anthropologist Jane Walsh, examined the skulls under the electron microscope. On the surface, they found the unmistakable marks of rotary cutting wheels, the tools of a modern jeweler's workshop, not the patient hand carving of a pre-Columbian craftsman. The quartz of the British Museum's skull appears to come from Brazil or Madagascar, not from Mexico at all. And the paper trail kept leading to one man, a 19th century French antiquities dealer named Eugène Bobon, who sold several of these skulls to European collectors. They were almost certainly cut in the German lapidary town of Idar Oberstein, famous for carving Brazilian crystal. Here is the decisive fact. Not one crystal skull has ever been recovered from a proper, documented archaeological excavation of an Aztec or Maya site. Not one. They are creations of the 19th and 20th centuries, objects of belief rather than antiquity. The Smithsonian's own skull arrived anonymously in 1992. wrapped with a note claiming Aztec origin, and it too betrayed the marks of modern cutting wheels. And there is a sharp irony in how we know. It took the most powerful seeing instruments we have ever built, electron microscopes and chemical fingerprinting, to reveal the truth that these so-called windows into the unseen were hiding. Which brings us to the real question. Step back from all 10. What do they actually share? Look across the 10 objects, and they split cleanly into two families. One family bends light. The other reads signs. The first family is optical. The magic mirror, the crystal eyes of Saqqara, the Visby Lenses, and Nero's emerald all work, or claim to work, by manipulating light itself, by reflection, by magnification, by focus. They extend the eye. They let a person see the distant, the tiny, or the hidden detail that the naked eye would miss. The second family is divinatory, the Urim and Thummim, the bronze liver of Piacenza, and the oracle bones do not touch light at all. They read signs, cracks in bone, marks on an organ, the fall of sacred lots, and translate them into knowledge no sense could reach, the future, the guilty party, the will of a god. And a third group sits between the two. The Nebra Disc both observes the sky and predicts the season. The Obsidian mirror is a polished optical surface used to induce visions. The crystal skulls are worked quartz wrapped in prophecy. Optics and divination blurred together. Notice what keeps recurring across 3 continents. Quartz. Rock crystal shows up in the eyes of Egyptian statues, in the lenses of Gotland, and in the skulls of the modern forgers. Clear, hard, and cold, crystal has always felt pure and powerful, a natural candidate for a window into another world. And notice the deeper pattern that ran through every single object. In each case, practice came before theory. The mirror makers baffled physicists for nearly 2,000 years. The Visby grinders shaped a curve that geometry would not describe for another 6 centuries. Again and again, the craft ran ahead of the explanation. Which forces a harder question about the word in this video's title. In what sense were any of these objects banned? The word banned turns out to have many faces. Sometimes an object was outlawed. Sometimes it was buried. Sometimes it was destroyed, or forgotten, or quietly erased. Every one of these 10 was hidden from sight in some way, and the manner of hiding tells its own story. Some were buried by their own makers. The Nebra Disc was deliberately placed in the ground with a horde of weapons and lay hidden for roughly 3,600 years. Some were consumed. The oracle bones were ground into medicine and swallowed. An entire archive of the ancient mind digested before anyone realized what it was. Some were suppressed by conquest and church. When the Spanish crushed the Aztec world, they attacked its idols and its divination, and objects like the Obsidian mirror survived only as curiosities carried overseas. In Japan, the hidden Christians disguised their faith inside magic mirrors precisely because open worship was banned. Divination itself was outlawed again and again. The Roman state eventually turned against the very haruspices it had once relied on, and Christian emperors in the late 4th century banned haruspicy and private divination as dangerous pagan magic. Scrying and crystal gazing were condemned by the medieval church, and John Dee, for all his learning, died in poverty with the reputation of a conjurer hanging over him. And some objects were banned in the most modern sense of all. Once the crystal skulls were exposed as forgeries, museums quietly removed them from display as genuine antiquities. Underneath all these different bans lies a single nerve. Authorities have always feared objects that promise hidden sight. To see the unseen is to hold a kind of power, and power of that sort is something rulers and priests have always wanted to control. Who is allowed to know the future? Who may speak with the dead or the divine? Across cultures and centuries, the answer was carefully guarded. And that impulse to suppress leads to a painful question. What did we lose for good when these objects were hidden or destroyed? The losses are real, and some are permanent. The Urim and Thummim are gone without a physical trace, their mechanism a mystery that will very likely never be solved. The Etruscan language itself remains only partly deciphered, and the bronze liver stays one of our best keys to it, a reminder of how much of an entire civilization can hang on a single surviving object. The recipes for casting a true magic mirror were nearly lost, reconstructed only in the modern era. The precise purpose of the Visby Lenses was never written down, so we are forever guessing. Nero's emerald has vanished entirely, leaving us to argue over a single Latin sentence. And the oracle bones remind us that we will never know how many were destroyed, ground to powder, before 1899. Ancient craft knowledge is fragile in a way facts are not. A skill lives in the hands of the people who practice it. When they die without teaching it, or without writing it down, it can vanish completely, leaving objects we can hold, but no longer fully understand. The archaeological record we have is only the sliver that happened to survive, and much of what survived did so by accident, by being buried, lost, or hidden. But the modern story is not only loss. The newest seeing instrument of all, science itself, has clawed some of this knowledge back. The electron microscope and chemical sourcing unmasked the crystal skulls and traced them to a 19th century workshop. X-ray fluorescence proved the obsidian mirror was truly Aztec, made from the volcanic glass of Pachuca. Soil chemistry defended the Nebra Disc against the doubters. Vision science recovered the optical genius hidden in the eyes of Saqqara. Museums around the world are now re-examining their oldest collections with instruments their original curators could never have imagined, and objects are giving up secrets they held for centuries. Heritage science has become its own way of seeing the unseen, which leaves one last thing to explain. Why does this hunger, this need to see beyond our own senses, never seem to die? Every culture in this video built a device to pierce the unknown, and they did it independently, on different continents, without contact. That is not coincidence. It is something close to a law of human nature. We cannot bear not knowing, and so we build objects to answer the darkness. The impulse did not fade with the ancient world. It only changed its tools. The magic mirror's descendants are the instruments of metallurgy, reading the invisible structure of metal. The crystal eyes and the Visby lenses are the ancestors of the telescope, the microscope, and the eyeglasses on a reader's face right now. The Nebra Disc and the oracle bones point forward to astronomy and to the keeping of written records. Even the divination tools have modern echoes in our forecasts, our models, our statistics, our endless attempts to predict what has not yet happened. The two ancient families, measuring the world and foretelling it, are both still with us, and so is the credulity. Crystal skulls, exposed as fakes decades ago, still draw crowds to museum shows. Scrying lives on in crystal balls and fortune-telling. The line between an instrument and a talisman has always been thin, and it is drawn differently by every culture. What one age calls science, another calls magic, and what looks like magic is very often just craft we cannot yet explain. In our own time, we gaze into new oracles, screens, and algorithms and predictive systems, and we trust them to show us what is coming, sometimes with more faith than the evidence deserves. The objects endure because the hunger endures. Seeing the unseen is the founding wish of both science and superstition, and these 10 artifacts sit exactly on the fault line between them. 10 objects and one wish beneath all of them to see what is hidden. The optical ones, the mirrors and lenses and crystal eyes, tried to extend the human eye outward, to reach farther and sharper than flesh allows. The divinatory ones, the stones and the liver and the bones, tried to bypass the eye altogether and reach straight for the future and the will of the gods. Some were triumphs of craft. Some were triumphs of belief. At least one was a triumph of fraud. But all of them answered the same ancient fear of the unknown. Their hiding is part of their meaning. They were buried, banned, burned, ground to powder, or quietly debunked, and what survived to reach us survived mostly by accident or by concealment. The newest seeing instrument, modern science, became the judge of all the older ones, vindicating some and exposing others. It confirmed that Bronze Age farmers really did read the sky, and that a black Aztec mirror really did cross the ocean into an English magician's hands. And it proved that the glowing crystal skulls were born not in ancient Mexico, but in a 19th century workshop. What remains is the mystery of everything that left no trace at all, the countless skills and objects that vanished with the hands that made them. The Egyptian sculptor grinding a crystal eye and the Shang diviner cracking a turtle shell were separated by thousands of miles and thousands of years, and yet they shared a single drive. That drive has not weakened. Right now, you are watching this through the latest seeing device in that unbroken line, a screen fed by lenses and sensors that reach where the eye cannot. The unseen still calls to us, and we still build objects to answer it. Think back to that first magic mirror, throwing its hidden pattern onto a wall. The image was always there, in the metal, waiting only for the right light to fall. The past is like that too. It hides in plain sight, patient, until at last we learn how to look.